see the bars on Mobius?
Okay. Okay. If it doesn't work, I'm gonna cry.
Don't cry. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, there we go. All right, guys, we're streaming. I might clip out that first 10 minutes. So I've known Alphanetic for how long? 5 years? Great.
Around 5 years.
Yeah, and what did we conflict about 4 years ago over? I remember the day I was in my sophomore year dorm in my double. My roommate was named Manas. That's unimportant, but I remember I was in that room, and it was just a day, and we just got on the topic somehow. And I forget necessarily how we got there. And I think it was just like, I think I had plans for that day, but none of them happened because the conversation went about 4 to 5 hours.
So did I, dude. We literally talked for I think 3 hours. I was yelling. I remember those yelling. It was very heated. My mom was confused as to what the hell was going on. So I apologize. Luckily. We're a bit more educated and a lot less not how old we were then.
Yeah.
So that's good.
I was probably 19.
Yes. And I'm older than that now. So we're good.
Yeah.
Let's think about that. It's been a lot. It's been a lot of time.
Yeah. And I remember that conversation. So 2 things about that conversation. Number 1, we just screamed at each other because we were very passionate, but not as knowledgeable as we could be. Number 1, that's definitely true. And number 2 is because we weren't very knowledgeable, there was a lot of intensity, but there was not a lot of substance, or there was not an ability to stay on one topic very long because we didn't know many things. So that kind of got in the way of good conversation. And so me and Alphanetic have reconnected in a little bit bigger of a way since I'm now back on GD too, so a little bit. So it's kind of just, he's been around instead of just sending me a snap once a year, and then I'm like, oh, how you been? He's like, good, come to PA, and I'm like, I can't. And
it's I just come to PA, then there's no issue.
I will, once I have the ability to travel, as I will, because I monetarily can. I will of course visit you and everybody that needs a visit, like Gabe down there in BC. Yeah, so we've changed a lot, and we've kind of connected again. So we figured, let's at least start with trying to understand where we're at, and then if we see some clash, then we can actually do some sort of debate if we want to. So I figured tonight would be a good time to just worldview share, and it might be edifying for you guys as listeners, because we might engage passionately over a few things. I sense it is possible, but also you'll get to see, hopefully, a more mature, useful, interesting discussion about 2 people who definitely disagree with each other, but 2 people who also care about each other. And I think that's something that lacks pretty heavily in this world, in the relationship of different belief systems in this world. The only person I've seen on the atheist side that I like the most for this particular kind of conversation is Alex O'Connor. I think he does this pretty well, and I like him a lot. Or Peter Boghossian. I like them. I think they interact in a way that shows that they're caring about the other person. On the Christian side, I'd say the same thing, by the way. I think a lot of them just they don't show as much care as they could when they interact over these topics. And I think that's something we're trying to set the example for a little bit. Because on both sides, it's troublesome. But yeah, I think let's just jump into it. I think really we'll start vague and specify as we go, I think, but I want to really genuinely know where you're at. Basically, you can start with just some of the main contentions you've had. You've now lived 3 more years. I'm assuming you've studied at least 1 minute, at max a billion minutes of atheism and Christianity. So maybe talk about top contentions, and let's go.
So, yes, so it is between 1 and a billion minutes.
That's good.
I will say it's around that. So good job on your end. So just so everybody's clear. So there's no misconceptions.
Sure.
And also, just so I can kind of explain why my opinion here, why my input does have some substance to it. So I will say I've been studying this for many years. I grew up in a Christian household. I'm sure most of the people in here, if not everybody, have probably seen the clip of my dad yelling at me playing a Hell Team level.
One of the greatest clips of all time. I'm actually going to look it up while you talk so it can be shown on the stream. It's
actually fire. But I know it became kind of a joke. But yeah, so I went to a Christian school, grew up as a Christian. I progressively kind of got out of it. I currently study philosophy with a concentration in religious studies, and expect my master's degree in 2020, at the beginning of 26.
Well, that's impressive. Good for you, man. Congrats. Good luck.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And then I'll go and get a PhD after that, just real quick. I intend on teaching philosophy. That's the goal. But I will say my experience talking about theology has totally gotten me to a point where I'm in love with the subject of philosophy. But I will say there are, through that whole period, I will say there are a lot of things that definitely stuck with me. I will say the number one, whenever somebody asks me why it is that I don't believe in Christianity, Christianity specifically, my reason is always immediately, it does not align with the current understanding of the world. And when I say that, I mean pretty much every field of study ever: biology, chemistry, cosmology, anthropology, mythology, history. I mean, I could go on, and I already know you've got a million ideas in your head right now, but through these, it's very difficult to say that every single scholar, at least for the most part, not every one of them, because obviously there's going to be those outliers, there's going to be those creationists, but for the most part, the fundamental understanding of biology and cosmology that we have, that is completely built upon through evidence, like strong evidence, is completely thrown out when you read the biblical narrative. It's completely thrown out. So we have to make stretches.
Can you give me an example of this?
And say all of the scientists, evolution. I'll go right there. Through our understanding of geology, anthropology, biology, that's all wrong, because evolution can't be true, at least not on the macro scale. And if it is, human evolution at the bare minimum, if we're taking the fall, the Adam and Eve story, as literal, human evolution can't have happened. If there was billions of years that the planet existed, before that, humans could not have been there, because then the Adam and Eve story would not be true, which kind of would have a domino effect on the rest of the Bible. So that is, I think, a good place to start. The scientific consensus seems to go against the biblical narrative. So why should I trust the biblical narrative when I can falsify things in the scientific explanations?
Yeah. Wow. A man has studied. First, before we start getting into that, we have to show this. We have to show this clip, and you know we have to show it. So I'm going to show this 1 minute clip. Man plays Hell Challenge and Christian Dad interrupts. You can see it on the YouTube. Let's play it. Why is this a silent but captioned version of this? This is, I picked a video that's literally a silent but captioned version of this. Wait, I'm gonna find
dude, I know what you're talking about. It's got audio.
It does not.
We can't hear. We can't hear it through the Discord call, so it's kind of just just sitting in silence here.
I wanted to play it for whoever would watch stream, but I literally won't play any sound for me.
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
All right, whatever.
My dad yells at me because I play a level.
I'm just gonna leave it up vaguely, but it's actually genuinely really funny. It was so funny. This was 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, and it made it into the 1 week ago EVW GD memes vid. I mean, dude, that has pull. That has intensity to last that long and make it into that video.
All right.
But
I know it's weird.
Anyway, it was a funny clip. Anyway, so let's start. Yeah, let's talk about science. So I'm just gonna ask you questions, and I want to get an idea of where you're at. So when you talk about science of today, do you think that science of today is able to, in any way, accurately know for certain the order of things as they occurred in the past?
So I know. So you're specifically referring to dating. Are dating
No, I'm referring to anything. So dating is a part of it. Dating methods, I think they're very logical, but they're logical based on a naturalistic perspective. That's a different discussion. I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about the whole building of of what I consider to be a theory of evolution or a theory of creation or things like that. Do you find that, like from your worldview, that science, as you understand it, is able to understand those concepts with certainty to where you can say this is exactly how things are or how they happened?
We can't do that in the same way that we do that with math, right? Okay. Oftentimes we have to be careful with the vocabulary we use because we're not able to prove anything in science. Actually, the highest level of something when we're strictly staying in that category would be called a theory. A theory, intuitively, a lot of us are like, oh, that's just a theory. But
a game theory.
It's right. No, I walked it right into that. But when we say that's just a theory, well, it's not just a theory, because in science that's the best we can do. All we can do is get to a theory, right? So we do need to be really careful with how we're talking about things. But to get to that point, we need to be able to say, all right, is this something that we can falsify? Is this something that we can demonstrate is most likely to be accurate? Is this something that we can use to infer different outcomes and estimate what is going to happen and make predictions, right? And that's what we can do. We can make predictions in science. And if through these theories we make predictions and we're right, well, then we're only to assume that the most logical conclusion is to believe that the theory is true.
But I am right in saying that when it comes to the science that humans perform, the best we can do is find most likely and least likely and middle likely scenarios and parse between them.
Yeah, it's a scale.
Okay,
sure.
Yeah, all right. That's what I wanted to know. So when it comes to science itself, the process of science, how does that work? What principles is science and its discovery and the way that you go about, or the people you researched into would go about finding out if something is true or not true, or at least likely or not likely? What is the principles that is based on, if you know?
Prediction. If we can predict.
Mm-hmm. So
if we can use it as a method to say, okay, I think this is going to be there, like in cosmology, right? We'll say, we'll make calculations and we'll infer, okay, I think that this planet is going to be at this location at this time. And then using those methods, those theories, and then it ends up being there, we're going to assume that it was true. It's a true theory.
Okay. Okay, I understand where you come. Wait, Nighthawk said something. Okay, cool. Just wanted to read what he said. But okay, so in those predictions, what about those predictions provides a foundation for saying that what you're seeing now, right? So you go through a scientific method. You have predictions. You have tried to infer some things about the past. Maybe you even are able to not prove, but show evidence that things happened in the past. And then you have predictions to show you that confirm that they're still happening now. What foundational principles might indicate that is how the future will be too?
Because if we have, remember, we're just using probability.
Yeah.
I mean, if we can demonstrate that something is the case repeatedly,
mm-hmm.
why would we assume that it's just going to stop?
Can we know that it won't stop?
Well, I didn't say that. This is why it's not mathematics, right? But if we have something that's consistent, the most likely scenario is that it is going to remain consistent.
Okay. And why is that?
So why would we? Well, because there hasn't been sufficient reason for us to believe that it's not going to be that way.
So
if we have evidence that it's going to do something and it keeps doing it, then why would I think, oh, I'm going to stop believing that? I have no reason to point to it stopping working.
But science can only pull from the sample size of your lifetime, or at least the past couple of lifetimes that have lived. So my question would be, when it's posited to me that the Earth, and I might even accept a 14 billion year old Earth, by the way, believe it or not. I know it's crazy, but and we can get into that. But if the Earth is 14 billion years old and all this time has passed, and all we have is a sample size of this last couple hundred years to tell us what we think always was happening before and what is currently happening now, how is that all confident for us to look forward in the future and say, we'll continue in the same way? Like, because what, like, when you say likeliness, you're only looking at predictions being confirmed over what? The sample size of the research you're doing in this lifetime. So I would be curious about that.
So because when we're taking different variables in a scientific experiment, mm-hmm. we can establish what change will cause something to alter, right? There's independent, there's dependent variables. Correct. Right? We've learned this in 6th grade biology. Yeah. So if we understand at a very strong conceptual level that the variables that come with time are not going to alter this specific conclusion, whatever we're talking about, then there's no reason to assume that it's going to change. The variables are really important. And if we know that time is not a variable in which it's going to change the conclusion, then we are to assume that it does not matter.
Okay, so to be clear, what I'm hearing you say is that within the amount of time that either your life exists or the research you're speaking of exists, you can only predict, and you can only predict the likeliness of event continuing to reoccur in the same way, and you have to assume it will. That's the best science can do. The best science can do is repeat within a small sample size of, say, your life or the quantity of the research, maybe it's a few lifetimes. It can only predict the likeliness of event continuing the same way, and you have to assume that in the future it will.
Yeah.
That's the best science can do.
Yes, that's pretty much. I mean, we don't have time machines. Yeah. I mean, we're just taking this, but we can make the assumption, and it would be valid to do so, to make the assumption that nothing is going to change with the variable of time.
Why is that valid?
At least nothing substantial. Why is that valid?
Yes.
It's valid because we have no reason to think otherwise.
Okay, so, but I don't understand how that would make the assumption valid. You're making an assumption, and all you're saying is because I can't think of another better reason to think a different way. Like that doesn't seem like a reason.
Well, this is what we do. So it is inductive reasoning. So technically, it's not valid. It's technically not valid because it's inductive reasoning. So I'll change my vocabulary there. Because it's inductive, it is a strong assumption to make. It is strong and cogent as well, because we have it's not just that I have no reason to think otherwise. It's that we have a strong explanation. We can say, okay, this is a thing that's happening, and all of the evidence seems to indicate that this will continue to happen, and that the variable of time will not change that. Then the most likely scenario is that time doesn't matter here, at least not in any substantial way. So we're just going to assume, with everything that we ever assume and everything that we ever believe, it just comes down to what is most probably true.
Okay.
So while we're not going to actually be able to time travel, we can just make the assumption, and it would be fair to do so, that time isn't going to do anything. At least, but we could be wrong. Sure.
Okay. And if you are wrong, what science does is then adapts to the new data, right?
Yes.
Cool. So if all you can do is make assumptions, and then as soon as something changes, you adapt to the new data, how is science then a legitimate framework for even responding to the question if God is real or not?
I'm not using science specifically to refer to say that God is not real. I'm saying specifically this traditional Western theistic mindset that God, the biblical God, is most likely not real.
Because science has.
I'll adapt to that then.
Sure.
I'll adapt to that. So, because our understanding of the world, right? Cosmology, our understanding of biology, right? Our understanding that this isn't, right, we're not geocentric. That is something that was foreign to the authors, right? That it's just something they didn't know.
The Bible's not geocentric.
So we have to look at it from both. What's that?
Bible is not geocentric, though.
Well, it does talk about a flat plane. It says that there's a firmament.
Firmament does not mean that. The four corners is a passage that is an expression to describe the entirety of the world's area. Not like are you referring to the passage where it says that he'll send his angels to gather from the four corners of the earth?
Well, I'm more so referring. So the conception that four corners was more four quadrants, right? And this is something that we kind of say, and I know what you're referring to. That notion, like, oh, it's just an expression.
Can you cite the scripture you're talking about?
I'm not. I don't have a Bible on hand. I'm not sure exactly what the. Oh, I'm not sure exactly.
I'll turn to it.
Which passage it is. I couldn't tell you exactly which passage it is. I don't have the exact verse memorized, but I do know that it does talk about specifically the four corners. It's what you were saying. Do you know what I'm referencing?
I believe so.
All right. Well, my only point here is just that, I mean, this is kind of a moot point, but I'm just saying that this narrative of a flat Earth is it's coincidentally accurate to how the Bible explains the plane, right? And so I'll start with firmament. The original Hebrew word was supposed to, and in every context, we can say now that it meant atmosphere, but in every context that we can find, never is it referring to the atmosphere. It is always consistently referring to a glass dome. And this idea, this conception of a four corners or the four quadrants, right? That is also consistent with what people used to believe that the Earth was. That expression came from the idea that there was four, like, quadrants of the plane, of the flat plane, right? So while this is circumstantial, it's just strange, and it also makes sense when you're looking back on it, saying, okay, well, these guys didn't know any better. So is this divine word, or is this just consistent with what people believed back then? I'm a lot more inclined to want to say that it's more consistent. It's just that they didn't know, and they got it wrong.
So Revelation 7 says, after this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or any sea or any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun, having the seal of the living God. And he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels, so on and so forth. This passage is in Revelation. This passage is in a book of apocalyptic literature that uses expressions of imagery all over, which means, okay, if this was in Paul's discourse, and this just came out of nowhere, okay, I could allow for your argument, but this is in Revelation, written clearly, figuratively. Like, there's no even Bart Ehrman, your friend. I don't know if you like Bart Ehrman anymore, but Bart Ehrman would not argue that Revelation is not very full of imagery. It not only says four corners of the earth, but then gives the purpose for the angels being there, which is to hold back the four winds of the earth, and that is a definite, unequivocal, common expression for the winds that come from the four different directions on the compass of the earth. There's no confusion about that. It's a commonly used expression. And it says, so that no wind would blow on the earth, or any sea, or any tree. So no one would say, oh, the four winds of the earth is not talking about four winds. It's talking about all the winds from all the directions. But the four corners of the earth is talking about a big old square, or some primeval view. So I would say that I feel like that argument on that verse is just very weak to then say, oh, well, this then entire book doesn't make any sense. I would also point out another thing that I think is important for our thinking. The Bible, I don't believe, makes any large scientific errors. I will look into the firmament. I did not do study on that, but I do not see that debated a lot. So that would immediately come to my mind as, okay, well, why is that not a big topic then?
I disagree.
But I will look into that particular topic on what that is said about that. But there's a lot of situations in the Bible where it's not scientifically inaccurate, but it's not scientifically detailed either. And it will use expressions like the four corners of the earth, which would be understood to the people reading it. The reason is because the purpose of the Bible has a purpose when being written by its authors, and that is to communicate a message to its people. Okay, so if Revelation 7 took a break and gave you just a full discourse on what the earth is like, and then went back to the four winds of the earth and the imagery of Revelation and the angels, then it would be completely defeating its purpose and be totally just out of line with what the Bible's trying to do. It's trying to use its words to communicate a message. So unless it makes an absolutely egregious error that's obvious, I know we talked about in our conversation 4 years ago, I remember it still to this day, where you talked about the one word that meant circle, and I pointed out that the word can also mean sphere, and it was a singular word in a single verse in a prophetic book talking about judgment and the way the Lord upholds the universe and things like that. And to pick on that as if to say that that is an egregious error when it's clearly just a word usage to describe something greater, and it's not even actually egregiously inaccurate, would be, to me, a very confusing way to try to take down the entire scripture. So that would be, I don't understand the attack on Revelation 7 as useful.
I'm not taking down the entire scripture.
Or even that verse, to be honest.
Right. All I'm doing is I'm saying that we can look at it through both perspectives. We can look at it through the perspective of they didn't know, they were just saying with what they understood, or that it was divinely inspired.
Okay.
So what we can do is we can say, okay, well, let's look at it through both perspectives and see which one fits more, right? So when we have stories like the creation story, for instance, and when we have stories like the biblical flood, which is in every corner of the earth, that is understood as an impossible story. Not just talking about raining for 40 days and 40 nights. The story could not have happened.
I saw the Pine Creek video. He was pretty inaccurate, at least that particular one I saw, but he did make it sound good.
I don't know who...
You sent this to me a long time ago about the flood. I remember it.
Oh, okay.
Pine Wood, Pine Creek, Pine Forest. I don't know, some guy.
I think I know what you're referring to. Well, I think I know most people that understand this topic a bit. Have you seen like the Bill Nye debate? I think that was pretty good.
With Ken Ham? Yeah. I think that was just on both sides a pretty unfortunate debate.
I don't think it was on both sides.
Are you talking about the one where they were in the ark?
So there was two. That was the second one. But the first one was more formal. It was a formal debate. It was actually very good. And Bill Nye, he pointed out quite a few things. For one, how we will pretty much never find the speciation on the planet to align with that narrative that all the animals would have derived from Mount Ararat. The notion that there was also these like bridges that just kind of spawned out of the water is also quite egregious as well. We have the most amount of species in places like Brazil, which is on the other side of the planet. And then also where all of the animals would have derived from, there's like nothing. Yeah. There's like no variation of species. And also think about what would have happened afterwards. After they came down, after being on that boat for a year, all of the vegetation around them would have been wiped out completely. And just also, what are they eating on the boat? Each other? Well, that's not the case. Are they just not eating at all? What about all of the work that comes with that? What about all of the poo? What's the narrative doesn't align with it. It also doesn't align geologically. We would see some sort of evidence for it, but we just don't find any. Not through any sediment. There is no indicative. And I'm not going to argue for the scientists here. I'm just saying that the consensus is this, and we can do that for not just this story, but again, the creation narrative. We can do it for things like the Exodus or the Tower of Babel, right? We can keep going and follow through this, and then point back to those perspectives. What is more likely? Did the authors just get it wrong, or do all of the scholars now who have far greater understanding are they wrong?
Yeah, I think a lot of those topics when you talk about flood consistency and historical consistency of like Babylon and stuff like that, I have a lot of different thoughts that come to mind. I think a lot of those would be good for a more of a long form debate because we need to get into details there, or it's not going to make sense to anybody who's listening right now because we need to go back and forth on some things for that. So we could consider that as actually a topic for us to somewhat formally debate for real. Not right now, Nighthawk, maybe at the end. Because there's a lot of different responses to that and to parse through. I know that the creationists or even just the biblicists, right? Not everyone's a six-day creationist, have responses about the flood and the historical evidences. There's a lot of historical evidences that point to many of locations in the Bible. And then non-believers will be like, well, that's actually not important in demonstrating the Bible's true. It just references some useful places and things like that. And they go back and forth. And so the only useful way to cover those type of topics would be to really zero in on one. And I'm fine with choosing one of those to do so. I wouldn't mind the flood. I don't personally have. I don't know. You focus on that a lot more than I do. I think I kind of I don't focus a lot on creation, the creation part of this as much. But I'd be fine too. Yeah.
I focus on the flood because it's so egregiously wrong. Like it just gets it all wrong. I mean, through many fields, are complete. Like not even just we're getting something a little wrong. Like the fundamental principles that establish geology would have to all be demonstrably false if Noah's flood happened.
I mean, something I've heard, and maybe you have an easy response to this because these seems like old things. Two things I've heard that at least just hit my mind is like, okay, is number one, the discovery of all these sea fossils in tops of mountains. So I wonder what you might say about that. I'm sure you have an answer for that. Yes. And then, of course, the idea that at least this is what I've understood, the only way things like the Grand Canyon could have been formed, there had to be some instant, quick, high pressure catastrophe to form those layers that quickly and just absolutely petrify those fossils so you'll see fossils where like fish are in the middle of eating other fish and things like that. And how do those fossils just rapid fire fossilize in that way immediately? It would need some sort of large catastrophic high pressure event, which seems reasonable to me to think about. Again, you talk science like this is not my main area of study. I'll go crazy for it for you if you want to do a debate on it. But those are things I've heard, and I'm like, okay, at least those are thoughts to kick around. I'm sure you have responses to those. But yeah, thoughts?
So first thing you said, remind me.
Fossils at the top of mountains that are from the sea. Right. Millions of them.
So that's expected.
Why?
Think about why and what mountains are. What is a mountain, right? It's the plates in the ground. I'm no geologist, but it's tectonic plates kind of pushing into each other and they push it themselves up. The point is, the top of a mountain was one day at normal level. And those times and those instances that we do find fossils at those high layers are consistently in very aged sediment. Very, very aged. And coincidentally, the aging always aligns with what we would believe through carbon dating when they would have existed. What's that?
Carbon dating. I do want to talk about that afterwards. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Also, what you're saying here with the fossils that are like eating each other, I've not seen any specifically like that. But if that were to happen in the same way that like volcanoes can even imprint shadows into the ground and we can get full on body molds of people, like a catastrophic event would surely do that. But that's not to say that a worldwide flood happened. Also, the canyon claim is like, with all due respect, it's completely unsubstantiated. That goes against pretty much every scholar I've ever heard, and I mean every textbook ever. But my claim here is not that I'm going to disprove what you're saying. I'm no scientist. All I am doing is I'm communicating what is the consensus. Mm-hmm. And my point philosophically here is that the consensus seems to always go against what the biblical narrative
always
is. So we can tackle, not always, but for the most part, when we can falsify things, we seem to always come up with this pattern that something is awry. So,
well, when you have a worldview that wants to falsify, then I would say you can usually come up with something.
Well, yes, but here's the thing. If I can't trust the claims that we can falsify in the Bible, then why should it trust the claims that I can't falsify?
So when I'm going... who did that? It's funny. Who did that? So here's what I'm going to point out. I feel like you bring to the table a little bit of an inconsistent standard. And along with this is why I don't focus in on scientific evidential methods for biblical discussion on, like, does God exist and stuff like that, is because at the end of the day, when you really have to talk about science at large, you have to come down to the admission that this is studying now and perceiving a few consistencies and predictions now to then make assumptions or predictions about what things were like in the past and will be like in the future with no actual certainty on that. But then you say that, but then when you get into the details, then you say things like, oh no, but we've falsified that. We've actually shown that that couldn't be, the Bible has to be way off. And I think that's a little inconsistent. The reason that I don't take this, that I do not usually focus in on this area as far as the way I'll defend the faith is because I don't think the atheistic side has a actual foundation for actually demonstrating conclusively that the Bible does not cannot be potentially accurate in this area. I don't think the Bible and science and the scientific details connect enough as far as the data up there to even make that claim. As well, the atheist at the end of the day has to say, well, we've built a worldview and a system of logic based off our particular observations now, and so all we can do is make an assumption about the past and the present. We can't show that that's true. We can only say that this is probably true based on the little bit that we know now. So it seems to me like that's why I don't even. For you, I would, because I think you're very smart, but normally I wouldn't even go there as far as where the kind of topic I would debate for atheist versus Christian, because I'm like, at the end of the day, you guys don't have necessarily a way to really show, like, you'll never through just talking to me about evolution be able to really take down the Bible's existence. So why not talk about the more things that matter a little bit more? That I think for me that's a tough. I would love a response to that, because you're gonna have.
What are you saying exactly is wrong with? So are you saying that scientific methods, because they are unreliable and have been demonstrated to be something that we can't 100% of the time trust, therefore we should completely reject it, and there's no foundation at all because they've been wrong before?
No, then that's what I'm saying. I think science is an extremely useful tool. I actually personally think it was given to us by God as a gift for us to understand the natural order he gave us, so we could utilize it.
Well, why would you trust it if it doesn't have a foundation? Okay,
so I do trust it. Hang on, I'm trying to make a distinction. What I'm saying is that it does not have a valid, distinctive foundation to actually show conclusively through its work that either something happened 13 billion years ago or somehow through that God or the Bible is false. And so it's not worth arguing in that category to me, or spending the most of my, because like I could spend my time studying in a lot of ways. Okay, I usually spend it on the presuppositional stuff, because I think that's a lot more important. I think worldview and your heart and your mind connected is really where the problem is. Or I could also spend it all on studying which fossils show the most evolutionary, whatever, and study all that stuff. Yeah. I just don't see how even spending most of my time in that area is very useful, because at the end of the day, all I can say is, well, I've studied all this science and I can say that I think it's most likely that things happen like this. And I think probably around 14 billion years ago, this happened. And I think around 6 billion years ago, this also happened. And I don't know, but it seems to me from the study we did over the last 200 years of these 14 billion, that we can probably say that this probably did happen. Now, what am I basing that on? I'm basing that on scientific reason and the laws of logic, which I have to borrow from the Christian religion, because I don't have a basis to have a law of logic, since I'm just random nothingness and I don't have any meaning in my existence. But I'm going to borrow that because I know it makes sense to use logic. And then I come to this answer that I can only tell you is possible, but not necessarily true. So that's like where I am at. That I would want to be. Thanks, I guess. So we got to clap from the same guy on both sides. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. There was a lot there.
Oh, you bet.
That was a big dump. There was a.
I wanted to get my worldview out finally a little bit there.
No, thank you. So I understand where you're epistemologically. I understand where you're at. So a few things that I really want to unpack here.
Sure.
This notion that science and theology can't work together.
I think they work very well together.
And that one can prove the other wrong is just nonsense. It's just not true.
I agree.
But I really do want to emphasize what I was saying before. If I have, say I call a witness to a stand, right? Say I call a witness to a stand. We're in a courtroom, and they keep telling me things, and they keep getting things wrong that say we've seen a recorded footage of somebody killing somebody, and then this witness comes to the stand and they say, no, that's not what happened. We're going to raise an eyebrow, right? So then when we don't have recorded footage and they say, no, actually, I saw this person kill this person. Well, we have demonstrable knowledge that they were wrong about their first claim. So why would I trust their second claim? And this right here is my issue with the
Can Bible. I stop you once? I have to stop you 1 second. Sure. I love the analogy. I think the analogy is, I'm just going to say, I just think it doesn't already apply because we don't have recorded footage. So you're saying you bring in a witness to a stand. If he disagrees with the recorded footage, you're right. Science doesn't have a recorded footage. So science, that's why I'm saying it's not a valid path to really bring anything to the stand.
Not in literal recorded frames, but we do have very clear trackings through, say, geology is a great example. We can watch evolution happen through rocks. It's awesome. What we can do is we can look further down into the sediment and find simpler and simpler and simpler species until we eventually get to unicellular organisms. We can track it. It's very coincidental that it starts at the bottom and is very simple and then proceeds to progress into this tree, right? That's what we expect. But while it's not literally recorded in 60 frames a second in a video,
to fill in a lot of gaps there.
It's
with theory. You do have to fill in a lot of gaps there with theory. So you're saying you're saying that because you find more basic and basic organisms as you go further down into the rocks, that therefore we can conclude that things evolved into each other over time?
Well, it's not just that. It's one of the pieces of the puzzle, but that's a huge one, right? That's a giant glaring flag that says, hey, when we look at the old rocks, things were really simple. But the higher we get up and the more time that progresses, animals seems to become more diverse and more complex. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. So
thanks, Tunic. I think this is Tunic.
I do want to go back to what you were saying, though. I really want to drive home this point. We have this new information that would not have been available there. They wouldn't have known that when they were writing the story.
Okay.
So this is something that we can assume either if they did know it, that's probably divine. That's insane if they could figure that out, right? However, remember, let's go back to the assumption. Is it more likely that this is something that is just made up? Or is it more likely that this is actually the work of divine inspiration? So when you're saying things like science is something that it should come secondary, I have to really hone in on this point that falsification, while not giving us an objective yes or no answer in English, it is a extraordinary tool that we can use to say,
but you're not falsifying anything.
The most likely thing. Falsification is just the process.
You're making a guess based on data, based on a little set of data that you have accumulated.
Not a little.
And already that is based in a worldview that already assumes no God. And so you're coming up with a naturalistic explanation
evolution
for it.
Evolution, that is such a strange notion. Evolution and God can coexist. If God exists, evolution also exists. Point blank. And I'm not talking micro. I mean, macro evolution has existed. and will have always.
I don't think that's a proven thing,
sir. Regardless of whether or not. Okay, well, who's to say that God didn't just snap his fingers and then start the universe in the cosmological way? Okay, well, that's my point. I'm not talking. Maybe not the biblical God, but God. Period. Yeah.
I'm confused. So I guess. Well, yeah. I'm just confused. What you're saying to me?
I'm saying that theism, just simply the belief that God exists, whatever that might look like. Me rejecting God, when I say I reject God, usually in America, people just automatically.
We assume the Christian. Okay, fair enough.
You don't believe in Jesus Christ, right? It's something along those lines, but that's just not accurate, right? It could have been something, and whatever that thing is, whatever that spiritual one essence, if it was just one, right? Whatever started everything, that can also be true alongside evolution also being true.
Okay, and that's fine. So if that's the case, then so do you believe that a God existing is possible?
Yeah.
Do you believe that the Christian God being real is possible?
Yes, it's possible.
Okay, so you're saying that you're in a position where you're more agnostic instead of atheist?
So that's a phenomenal question. So agnostic. So it's really important to define our terms.
Sure.
So atheist is just taking the prefix a, right? Non-belief in God.
Okay.
Right. And
does not believe in God. Yes.
Is right. It's a non-belief, right? Yeah. And then agnosticism is simply you don't know, right? It could be one way or the other. It could be that there's a God. It could be that there's not. Who knows?
Yeah.
But when we're talking about agnosticism, we're more so referring to somebody who is really down the middle, like it's 50-50 for them. Because I believe that there is no God. That is a belief that I have. However, I accept the possibility that there could be a God, which in that way, I lean more towards the definition of atheism because I still retain that non-belief in God, but I am accepting that, hey, I don't think it's a 50-50, but it's possible that there is a God. So I think agnostic atheist is usually what people will say when you're around that ballpark.
So here's a question. Given that science is ever adapting and has to take the data it observes in front of itself now and then make predictions or assumptions about other periods of time, historically or future, is it therefore possible that there could have been a flood? Simple question.
There could have been, technically, yes.
Okay. So if that's true, how can then science falsify the existence of the flood, therefore falsify the Bible in a useful way that actually can be convincing to you? If like you can admit that, well, science could develop and change from where it is now, and you're just a small portion of billions of years of time, and actually show that is a likely scenario, or at least now it's a possible one. I just want to leave it there for now because I'm just curious of your thoughts there.
So it totally could.
Yep.
But again, this is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that the flood definitely did not happen, therefore the Bible is not true. I am saying the evidence strongly indicates otherwise, which when we're talking about a book, this is what I was saying with the witness stand. This kind of falsification really matters. Again, this is what I was saying before. Why would I believe in the propositions in the Bible that I cannot falsify when the few claims that I really can falsify seem to be so demonstrably against what it is that we understand?
But you just said you can't falsify them. You just said you can't actually falsify them.
No, falsificate. No, I didn't say anything. I didn't say falsification. You can falsify them. You can't say for 100%, but falsification, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been a long time since I looked at the exact definition, but falsification is not a 100%. It's just a demonstration that it is more likely than not. It's evidence. It's not just something that I can say, right? I can say right now that
but based off a wavering system though, so that likeliness doesn't matter. Because it's only likely in the current amount that you and the human race understands. So you're going to base your belief system off the likeliness of a particular event that you could never even prove anyway, because you can't go back and observe it because of the current knowledge that you have now and the human race has now, and that's going to change every 50 to 100 years consistently forever because science is based on human observation. That seems like a very odd reason to reject the Bible.
So
thanks, Two claps for each of us today.
No, it's curious to me, because let's establish what your foundation is. You're saying that my foundation, because it can change, is therefore not reliable.
I think
and
mine
we
does
shouldn't
not
use it. And yours does not change.
Right.
I think that's a problem.
Okay.
I think that's a problem that yours doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
For two different reasons than we're thinking. Yours can't adapt. It can't adapt. It's written words, right? It's not like we can take those 2,000-year-old scriptures and
they tried.
Apply it to.
I didn't know what you were going to say. I assume you were going to say try to change them to fit the culture. That's what I thought you were going to say, and I was like, they do try, but it's.
Well, they try. You know the Queen James version?
Oh, awful! Please don't even read a word.
It's awesome. Right, but it's not going to adapt to modern knowledge, right? And that's a problem because we have now understandings of things that just simply, I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, but it just doesn't align.
Name one. Can you name one?
And here's Noah's flood, the creation story.
No, not that stuff. In the culture, well, I'm disagreeing with you on those. I really don't feel like I've come to a solid answer on those with you, except for you think it's just more likely given your study, but which I don't think is unfortunately very useful for me. But I think
but that's what you do too. It's all probabilities in belief.
Well,
what is it that you believe? Why do you believe what you believe?
Well, I believe Christ for many reasons, they are evidence-based, but they're not just like, well, I looked at the evidence and this is most likely, and I have to make an assumption. I believe we have very clear historical evidence regarding Jesus and his resurrection, his existence. I believe we have we can get into this later because I know you've brought this up. I think we have very clear historical records on the New Testament and its transmission and its accurate transmission and its accuracy from language to language over the course of time. I think we have a consistency within the scripture itself and no internal contradictions. And I'd be the great guy. Bring anyone you have, Alphanetic. I guarantee I have studied this and I've heard them all. I don't think there's any internal contradictions in the Bible. I have the testament to God, or at least this is a piece of the puzzle, some sort of intelligent design, or a God, at least coming through the testament of, number one, intelligent design, which again, we debate that if you want, or the morality and the ability for us to think and reason and recognize good and evil. And we have, of course, the fact that we exist in the first place, which I know cosmological argument, we can also talk about that. So that points to a God and a certain character of that God given morality. And those are not all convincing by themselves, but they build a case that's really convincing. And I don't have to say, well, I looked at some observations and now, well, I think that's probably what happened 6 billion years ago. No, I'm saying I live these things now. And I can look at the evidences. There's historical evidences, say, for Christ. There's historical evidences that can build a pretty consistent case without even using the Bible, with just using other sources. And pointing out facts about what happened at the time, sources that would not have any reason to be deceptive anyway, because I know that's a big push on the side of the non-believer, that the Bible was written by a bunch of deceptive people trying to push a doctrine. But point is, like, all those things together, if you're just asking me about my worldview before we debate all those mini topics, I look at all those things, the case, like, you want to talk about court case and witness, all those witnesses have come up, they've given their testament, and they have all aligned with each other very well. And because I can't see a better explanation for all those things existing together, not even a close one, then I've come to the conclusion that it must be Christ and God. And maybe you can break down every one of those things, Alphanetic. That's a lot of things to break down with science, which could change tomorrow. Tomorrow you could wake up and they could be like, yeah, you know, there's probably a worldwide flood. I've actually heard this. I heard like 10 years ago, while they would never admit that the Bible is true, I heard there was, and I can try to find it for you. I heard there was like, you know, just scientists, not believers, like just scientists who were like, there was some sort of worldwide flood at some point given things that we've seen. And so this could change at a moment. And then I'm bringing these cases to the table that cover all these different areas of our thinking, and they all line up with each other. It seems to be very hard for me to just undo.
Mm-hmm. So the idea that you're saying here is that it answers questions, right? It doesn't just answer things in this scientific realm, but it's also philosophically, it makes sense, right? We're able to answer questions. There's a lot of big questions here, and the Bible fits very well with it, and not just the notion of the Bible, but also the notion of the God, right? So I will say we can tackle each one of those arguments: the moral argument, the teleological argument, cosmological, ontological. We could go wherever we want, right? But I will say that the amount of things that God explains, I don't believe is enough. Because let's really break down what God is, right? It is a maximal being, right? It is a being that is perfect, is at the maximal level of everything, all loving, all powerful, outside of time, right?
I would say balance in their attributes. That's what I would say. Balance perfectly in their attributes, which they have in totality because of their holiness. But okay, however you want to define it.
But through that, literally anything within the bounds of logic, right? He's not going to create a square circle, but anything.
Thank you for not. By the way, thank you for not asking me the dumb question. Well, can God create a rock he can't lift? Thank you.
Well, I'm not. That's a whole thing. But I will say here that the convenience that comes with this kind of thing, right? a thing that can literally do anything is something that really can't be stressed enough. Yes, obviously, when you have a character that can literally do anything, it's going to answer questions. But with somebody who's, yes, obviously, science is going to be ever changing. But that doesn't mean just because you have something that's, I'll use the word, I know you're not going to like it, but magical. That doesn't mean just because it answers things.
I'll allow it.
Thank you. Just because it answers things doesn't mean it's the most probable thing.
That's not what I'm saying. That is not my argument. My argument is that when it comes to discussion of these topics, the Christian God is the most evidentially best answer. Let me say, like when you consider the history surrounding Christ and his resurrection, say, if you actually care for, and we can do this area, if you actually look at the data given and the details surrounding the cross that we know, I said even from without the Bible, like if you use just other sources, the data would point to at least an empty tomb, if only logically, because as far as all the details together, again, we can do this one time, a resurrection. That's coming from, I'm looking at data, I'm looking at the historical sources, all of them, all the ones that exist outside of the Bible, and of course, using the Bible, if you can allow for that as an eyewitness account, which I know you may not, all those texts, and they point to an event in history that, as you would say, is most likely Christ dying and resurrecting from the dead, and then a bunch of people continuing to worship him at the cost of their own lives, even though they wouldn't do that beforehand. And so that, to me, is not just like, well, big God can do anything. No, that's like, I'm looking at data and coming to a conclusion. Same with internal consistency of the Bible. Just to give you one more example, I'm looking at the fact that 40 or 66 books were written by authors over 1,400 years, and they were 40 different authors. Okay, but the doctrines, theologies, ideas, and facts amongst those texts all coincide with each other. Yes, do some of them you have to actually do your homework to understand a little bit? Yes, and so that's why when people point out those low-hanging fruit contradictions that appear in a TikTok, that's just nonsense. Because if you do any meaningful study, you see that that's not actually true. But when you get past that, and I have, and you study carefully and you look at what words mean and what they're saying and you look at the sentence before and the sentence after for once, I mean, then you see these things are just so clearly consistent with each other. How is that possible? I mean, those are pieces of evidence that are not just that I'm seeing with my eyes and experiencing, and not just, well, big God can do big things. So I reject that premise, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's funny that you're pointing to an evidentialist argument when you
I'm both evidential and presuppositional. Yeah.
But that was your whole thing against me. You're like, oh, well, those things could change too.
Well, I have a basis to apply a consistent standard that you do not.
This is also very selective. I'm sorry, you're also being very selective here, because you're saying, oh, well, I support the evidence in the Bible, except for like Noah's Ark. That I don't. No, that one, no.
I didn't say that. I did not say that I didn't support. I never said that. How am I illustrating that?
You're saying that my evidence could change with Noah's flood. Good. But
well, I'm not. I didn't. I said that to you as like a pointing out as a problem with your worldview and construct. Not that I agree with your evidence.
I don't think it's a problem at all that we're ever changing here. But I think it's my only point.
I don't think so either. But when you use that as a foundation to say, well, this is what I'm going to believe and stake my life on, then I think it's very, I don't know. It doesn't work.
No, it's not just that some things are wrong sometimes or don't align sometimes. It's that the very foundation of countless fields of study would have to be seriously put into question if the Bible was actually to be taken literally. That is a whole nother thing than just this can change. Right, sure, minor things at this point, but yes, things change, and maybe some major things at some point, but it's just the fact that it's more probable than not that they're not all extremely wrong about the foundation of what it is that they study, right? But that's a whole. Let's kind of move past that, because we've gone through that already. You started talking about the evidence for Jesus. I believe Jesus existed. As for the empty tomb, I really, really hope that you are not referring to the Shroud of Turin. You're not. You know what I'm talking about?
What, the one with Jesus's face or something? No, I'm not referring to that. I'm referring. That's not the evidence I'm talking about. I'm talking about historical writers from the time that are outlining facts about the Christians and the events of the time that even outside the Bible point to this event.
So let's go into that. Outside of the Bible, tell me about the Jesus narrative.
Outside of the Bible, as far as I understand, and again, on the spot with these, you would probably want to ask me to bring these sources to a conversation, and we should do that. But off the top of my head, I would be glad to. If you want, we can make that our next discussion. We can actually semi-formally debate the details of the resurrection.
History is not my field of study. I'm a philosopher. That's what I do.
Okay. But like off the top of my head, there's many different types of historians that wrote at the time. Josephus would be one. Tacitus would be one. Tacitus would be Roman. Josephus would be Jewish, but not a believer in the Lord. Not like a Jewish Christian, just like a Jew who recorded history. And a couple other sources I don't remember the name of, but they account, and not in long, egregious forms of writing, but in simple factual writing, they account things regarding the Christians. Again, I'd have to bring these sources for the exact wording, and I'd be happy to next time we talk. I can even make a note of that if you want me to. But it basically builds a case that offers 5 facts or 5 details that you can draw from with not even using the Bible. And as far as I know, I believe believe the 5 are that Jesus died, that Jesus he was put in a tomb, that there was an empty tomb, and that a bunch of people saw him, right? It's not saying that he resurrected from those facts. It's just saying, well, there was an empty tomb, and a bunch of people said that they saw him and had some experience where they saw him. And then there were disciples that, while previously in fear hiding and running away at Jesus' crucifixion, then turned and started preaching the gospel. And then there was converts that were at once hating Christians, and like Paul killing them, and then turned and became converts to Christ at his witness. So those would be, and again, I would need to prepare that to get the exact sources, and I can show that. But the argument is basically, given those details, those 5 details, you can show that that the resurrection, or at least you could make a pretty good case. The resurrection is the only possible event that could respond to all 5 of those details, because every other possible thing, and the biggest one is the stealing of the body. That's the one that, like, even Alex O'Connor, I think, goes with, is that the disciples stole the body. Just don't line up with all of those details. Maybe some of them, Jesus died and the tomb was empty. Okay, maybe the body was stolen. But really, then 500 people saw a live, informed, communicating Jesus, and then the disciples suddenly went from running and hiding to preaching the gospel until their death. And then there were later converts that once before were absolutely against Christ and persecuting Christians. I mean, these things wouldn't make sense with the disciples just stealing a body, for one, and then I believe all the other resurrection arguments are even weaker than that, like the other potential scenarios. And so that would be something for me that's quite convincing. I would like to see someone put forth a more convincing explanation than that, and that's not, and again, not even using the scripture itself, which again, to reject as an eyewitness account would be extremely inconsistent with the way we view the rest of history.
Yeah, that's true. We shouldn't just reject it because the Bible said it, right? Because they are actual authors, right? They're real people.
Yeah.
Witnesses. Well, as you know, that's not so in agreement. Even some Bibles will literally put in there that Matthew was not written by Matthew. And same goes for John, which is dated well over 100 years after.
It's dated
John
96 AD.
He wouldn't have existed then. And it was.
He actually would.
It's further than that.
He actually would be alive at 96. It's dated 96 AD by most scholars. I will debate you on that topic too, if you want.
96 is the low. That's the lowest I've heard.
Actually, the lowest I've heard is before 70 for the preterists, but
Matthew would be around 70, 80, right? These are, and this is pretty consistent. I think the earliest one would have been 50 or 60 AD.
That'd be Mark. That'd be Mark. Mark would be considered like 42. And then then there's the letter to the Corinthians, which of course accounts the entire gospel, written in 52, which includes in it what's called, you know what the Carmen Christi is?
I've heard of it.
The Carmen Christi is a few verses in the Corinthian text, which is basically the way it's written. It's clear that it was quoted from some sort of Jewish statement of faith or poem or something like that. It was not Paul's words. He was quoting this thing, which would indicate it's earlier writing than even the letter to the Corinthians, meaning that the beliefs of that of those ideas would be held at least demonstratively back into the 40s. And that is really, really close to the resurrection, which would be in theory in the 30s. So, and again, you're talking about writings that, 70 and 96. Those are within the lives of these apostles, my friend, who would probably have been.
They would have been. So, John, I have seen a lot of Bart Ehrman. I have that idea of 90 AD. I've just not seen.
I would happily debate you on all those dates.
I mean, that's not much of a debate thing. It's just which scholar do we feel like choosing today? That's not a debate.
I'm just saying we could get into those details, and I would be glad to.
I believe mine super hard. Right. Well, then that would get into carbon dating. That's not going to happen.
We can.
I just don't think it's worthwhile. Again, I'm not sitting here acting like I'm some historian. I'm just taking consensus. But my point in even mentioning that is, it does seriously draw question, because I'm not sure what these other sources are that you're referring to.
Josephus, Tacitus. I can get
also
these.
Corinthians. Corinthians, I don't know anything about. Same with Josephus. I'm not sure. Again, these are you apparently know more in this specifically than I do.
I can bring these next time.
I would love to read them. But from my understanding, it is not the case at all that the narrative of people coming alive, like the undead, that's spoken on, and I believe it's Matthew, is mentioned anywhere ever.
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
That one book.
I'm talking about.
I know. Hold on. But this is really important.
Okay.
And that's pretty consistent, right?
Okay.
The further along that these narratives seem to be made,
mm-hmm.
the more outlandish the stories seem to get.
Based off that.
And that's. Oh yeah.
So even though all four Gospels agree on most, I think the number is 80%, the details of the resurrection very closely, with minor difference that actually point to their validity, because the minor difference shows the difference in the perspective and the writing. You're going to take one piece of information that the other authors are not obligated to include in their gospels and say, well, that's outlandish to me, so therefore they're falsifiable.
So that does matter, and that's not a very fair comparison, because if Matthew talked about a bird that was flying across the sky and nobody else did, then who the hell cares? Isn't zombies something important to mention?
Is it?
Like that nobody ever in history ever talked about frickin' zombies coming out of the ground? That's a problem. Why would I believe this guy? If that was to happen, if we want to point to, oh, they're being consistent, I'm going to appeal to ignorance here and say that's pretty strange that nobody else mentioned that zombies came out of the ground and started wandering around, just having a good old time. How strange. It's just, I struggle to, and I'm going to get into a bigger point here. I struggle to believe that the most important event in history here has really only been documented by an amount of people that I can count on one hand, maybe a little bit of a second hand. I don't know what you're referring to here, but regardless, the number is very low.
That makes sense.
I could go right now and talk to some people who were a part of the Church of the Book of Mormon, right? I'm assuming you know a little bit about Joseph Smith. They will tell you, people who are not even still subscribed to it, they will tell you that they firsthand saw Joseph Smith come back from the dead. They've seen him do miracles. That right there is more than we have for Jesus Christ. So I'm sorry, but this evidence that you're bringing to the table is not even close to the same kind of evidence that we use when we're trying to determine if Noah's Ark is true. So I really want you to think about this for a second. Why does your evidence matter here when it's really, in all honesty, not that much? But the barbaric amount of evidence that we have for Noah's flood not happening,
we don't have.
What evidence? Any day.
Those are not related. Those are not okay. So those are not related.
They are. They're not related. Appeal to evidence is
no. It's but see again, you're trying to remove distinctions that are important. When you talk about Noah's flood and trying to figure out if that event in history happened by manner of scientific observation, you have to come to a conclusion about what scientific things are possible or not possible, or what methods and processes are most likely, and what manner of order you're going to apply to history in order to decide if that event's possible. You even admitted yourself that event is possible. You're saying it's unlikely given your view on science. Now, let me finish. So that it's unrelated, because you're getting to that answer on a likeliness based on looking at scientific understanding and processes. I'm talking about the recorded, again, I would say eyewitness accounts of people seeing an event in history. By the way, it does make sense that it's not recorded by many people, given that if you actually give credence to the context of the history of the time, you have this is not a big event in the world. Okay, it's a big event now because of the recordings we have of it and the incredible transmission and preservation of the text of the New Testament. But we do not have it. At the time, it was not a big deal. The Romans were not overly concerned with the Jewish people. They were not overly concerned with the events.
Because they kept getting stories like this.
That's not true. It just wasn't a big deal to them. What happened was they had one guy ruling over the area named Pilate, and they had like a puppet king named Herod, and they had them just kind of handle the area. And then Pilate eventually couldn't do his job, and they just sent in an army, and they just wiped out the nation and destroyed the temple. It was not a big deal for them because it was not really much of a fight for them to worry about, and they were fighting on many fronts. This was not like a historical focus of all the other contexts in the time. You can't say that. And so it would actually make sense that you don't have a million accounts at the time from all these other people who would not have been paying attention to this. I don't understand why you would expect more than that given the history. And then moving on regarding the Gospels themselves.
I do need it. I need to say something there.
Sure.
Why did Mark, Luke, and John leave that giant piece of information out?
I would ask you why they would be obligated to mention it.
Because it's zombies.
Okay.
It's a huge deal. That's not like, it doesn't matter what time frame you're in. it's like one person raises from the dead, they all got to mention it, but 50? That doesn't matter.
Aren't you bringing that assumption to the table? I mean, you're bringing that to the table. These are men. You consider Matthew, Luke, Matthew and John, who walked with Christ. Luke, who knew an apostle, and Mark, who I believe Mark was the one who was a writer and very close with Peter. You're talking about people who are very acquainted with seeing what, according to the text, just countless miracles of Christ. Who, again, in context, again, yeah, you don't believe miracles, but that's fine. At least from their perspective, in their writing, they see people being raised from the dead many times. They've seen people being healed and demons cast out and things like that many times, and most of them had ran away from the cross at the time that Jesus was being crucified, and they were writing a book with a purpose in which there were already many supernatural events that not all of them recorded amongst each other. They didn't all record everything the other person recorded. So it really, to me, seems like a very, very absurd argument.
I don't think it's absurd.
So you're saying to me that I need to consider the accuracy of the scripture because authors didn't include a piece of information that you think they should have?
It's not just simply that a bird flew above Jesus
so your
Christ.
Opinion is that would be important. That's all it is.
It's not even like it's kind of comedic that it wouldn't be considered important.
Okay.
Like, how is that not? Like, no text ever. It's not just in the Bible. Ever. There's no source ever of this insane event. Like, what? Why would I be expected to believe that if one person came up to me and was like, yeah, in New York City, like 50 years ago, nobody recorded it, but like a freaking Decepticon came out of nowhere and like blew up some things, but nobody recorded it. And
well, yeah, you would have no reason to believe that account unless you could trust the author.
So, but you can't.
Yes, you can. I believe you can. That's not true. That's not true. You're first of all bringing your assumption to the table on what events should and shouldn't be included in their writing, and then you're saying because of one event that I'm not done. One event that you find unanimous by who? From now on, every time you say unanimous consensus, I better get some sources in the future. I mean, because I don't see that in my study
right now. If me and you were literally authors, like believed, okay, my words right now that I'm writing down are so important. I'm about to give the divine word. This matters so much. Wouldn't everybody be like, oh, I should probably mention that? Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, yeah, I don't
think the authors were writing the scripture, recording the accounts of Jesus to include details because they were cool to them or because Alphanetic might find them interesting. It's just not listen, you could find it absurd. It's just not a valid argument against the scripture.
It's actually technically it's a fallacy because it's an appeal to ignorance. It's just in this specific scenario, appealing to ignorance does matter because we should expect an extraordinary event to have some more evidence than just one guy said it. Right? That's just not how.
Well, yes, the extraordinary event in question. The intent of the Gospels is to account Christ, his death, and his resurrection, which is accounted in all four, and again in sources outside of the Scripture. So that's the extraordinary event in question. I mean, well, this other event that I find absurd has to be in all four Gospels, or I can't believe the Bible is absurd. That is not an argument against the validity of the writing at all.
Okay, I really do need to knock this idea because this is now the second time you said this, or third maybe, that me taking one piece of information and saying now the whole Bible is wrong is just not accurate.
Okay, sorry if I overstated that.
So that's
my mistake if I overstated that.
It's a puzzle. It's a puzzle. It's a 1,000 piece puzzle right here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is a giant thing. This is a big part of it, though. This is a part of it, and this is something that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So the resurrection of Jesus. I want to talk here for a second.
Mm-hmm.
My point in even talking about that is because I do believe that there is some form of inconsistency within whether or not you are going to trust evidence or not. Because, and I want to explain why here. Because evidence, when we're just talking about evidence, it's just looking at external things and saying this is indicative of X, right? That's all we're doing. That's all evidence is. That's all it is, right? There's different levels of it. There's just different kinds. There's nothing wrong with that. I look at the biblical narrative that tells me, hey, Jesus was resurrected. And yes, we have 5, maybe 6 sources that tell us Jesus was resurrected. And they seem to kind of be in agreement. Okay. Well, again, I would just point to Joseph Smith has people who today will tell you that they watched him do the same thing. So that right there, that
it's
evidence,
not the same.
And for that exact reason, no, hold on.
I can tell you why.
That right there, because, and you've already told me why, but I'm getting into a greater point here. That right there matters so much as to whether or not one person is going to believe one thing or another. It's going to depend on what you already believe. That's just how it is. So when we're looking at different amounts of evidence and I'm saying, okay, here's a giant rock of evidence that says Noah's flood couldn't happen. And then you say, oh, well, a few people just so happened to say the same thing at the same time period.
Well, you're saying it's a giant rock. I don't believe that. You haven't demonstrated that.
But extraordinary events require what kind of evidence?
I do not believe in that cliche, but that's fine.
It is very cliche.
It's cliche, but I don't subscribe to that. So
okay. If I went and flew
what is extraordinary evidence? What is extraordinary evidence? What is it?
Extraordinary evidence.
Give me an example.
I know. Okay. Extraordinary evidence would be something like not just video footage, but also something that is consistent, right? Something that is, oh, okay, you're able to demonstrate this. You're able to say, this is more likely than not, and I'm going to give you a whole lot, right? If I watch somebody fly in front of me, I'm probably going to believe it. But then somebody else, I'm not going to expect them to.
So you can only believe something that you see?
Well, at that extent, first, well, that's not even close to true at all. But I'm saying within that specific one, which even then, how am I supposed to trust my sight, right? If I know people can go crazy, why should I trust that I'm not going crazy when I'm seeing that, right? This is the problem of epistemology. How should I believe that my truth
would seem
is
to me
more accurate
just
than
sometimes you say things like this, and it would seem to me very odd that in the case of the scripture, to believe it, you would require extraordinary evidence for something like Christ's resurrection.
Yes.
But then when you start looking into the scripture and talking about the scripture, you take a view so cursory and non-extraordinary that you're talking to me about idioms in Revelation 7. So if you're going to talk to me about extraordinary evidence, but you haven't discovered, what I'm confused about is the standard, because have you actually studied carefully the events regarding the resurrection, the transmission and the reliability of the New Testament, and how it got from then to now, and all the details in between, but track the scripture and its transmission across the last 2,000 years? Do you know those details? Do you understand them? Have you studied it carefully enough to then say, well, this is just not extraordinary. This is not enough for me. Or have you studied it very cursorily and you don't really know these details?
Have you done the same thing for the Exodus story?
Well, no, I thought you were going to ask the same question for the...
Or Sodom and Gomorrah. Have you done the same thing for
I would say hang on, Alphanetic. The purpose of the scripture is very much surrounded about the resurrection and its validity. If Christ rose from the dead, then we have a reason to listen to the scripture and take it seriously. Okay, if he actually existed and actually rose from the dead and died and rose from the dead and did something that no human can do, then we have a reason to listen to his words. This is not an argument. This is just obviously true. And so what I'm saying is, before you toss these things out, you better have studied them carefully then. Because you're saying, well, I need extraordinary evidence for this, but like, what if I asked you to tell me the details of the transmission of the New Testament up until now, which I believe is extremely extraordinary compared to any other text in history, so we can trust it way more than any other text in history. Do you know those details?
I have a pretty decent I have enough of an understanding for me to make a sound conclusion.
I bet.
At least for myself.
Okay.
Right?
And what is that understanding?
For me, might not be. Well, I would need to spend some time here explaining it, so I'll let you in when ready. I really want to say here what I was saying about the claim with Joseph Smith. It does fit here. It does. And the reason being is because that is objectively more evidence than what we have for the biblical narrative. It is. We have actual eyewitness testimony, and
we have claims.
An absurd amount of it.
We have claims.
An absolute. Okay. The authors are making claims in written form that seems to align with one another.
Even though it has been demonstrated that Joseph Smith was a lie, it's been demonstrated.
Yes, and so did Jesus. He was alive too.
No, he was a liar. That Joseph Smith was a liar. It's been demonstrated in real time history that he was a liar. So why would that be the same?
Okay, well, I can just because you can say that he's lied before, and we know that. What about the people who literally saw it? Regardless,
they say they saw
evidence. But here's my point. I know it didn't happen. I know.
And you guys didn't even see the flood, but you seem to think you know how it works.
Here's my point, dude. I'm saying that the evidence that you're giving, hold on, because, dude, this is what I said. I knew you were going to do this. That's why I prefaced and said you're going to have to give me a second.
Okay, fine. I'll give you the second. Go ahead.
Like, the amount of evidence that we are using here for Jesus resurrecting is a few people, can't even count on two full hands, said that they saw it in written form. That's what we have. That's what we got. But in real life, right now, we have people that are actively saying it and can say it to our faces that Joseph Smith did it, which is objectively better than a 2,000-year-old writing that was apparently, many of them, 50 plus years later. That right there is simply not enough evidence for me to say yep, Jesus is resurrected. I'm going to believe it, even though that goes against evolution, the beginning of the universe, and geology, anthropology, history, and in most regards,
Okay.
I mean, the Exodus story. There's no chance that the Exodus story even happened. There's
sure,
no chance
we can debate that.
Happened. But that's a whole. I would love to. There's actually a museum in Jerusalem that has a room dedicated to all of the evidence for the Exodus. It is an empty room. It is literally empty. We would have known if millions of Jews swarmed into friggin' Egypt. There's zero evidence for it. There's none. But I would love to get into that at some point. But my point here is just that the amount of evidence that you seem to think is enough seems to just change, because you were dissing me so hard in the beginning of this call about my ideas of what's enough evidence. Well, it can change. Yeah. And
no, I'm saying your foundation can change. I did not say I was not referring to evidence, so it can change. I'm saying your foundation can change, and that's why I think that your system is not reliable to live by. It pulls on ideas that you can't even, like, from your worldview, even substantiate.
Okay, well, you know what? The Quran as well is also going to stay put. What's the point?
What?
So is the Bhagavad Gita. They're not going to change. Their foundation is going to stay the same.
That's not what I was.
What about the Hindu Vedas?
What does that to do with what I said?
Okay, but that's my point.
No, but I don't think you understood what I'm saying then.
I know. Well, you're saying that my foundation changes and yours doesn't. So yours. You don't
have one. What I'm saying.
Well, I don't have a written scripture. No.
My foundation is the scripture, and that I believe came from God, and from a God that is consistent and all powerful in an unchanging way. Which means that if you want to talk foundation, you can say, well, I think that's nonsense. Cool. But I'm saying foundationally, I have one. I build off a foundation that does not shift. When you talk about science and you say to me, well, from the science that I've seen, it's just more likely that this didn't happen. Really, I mean, you're based off what? Based off observations that can shift and ideologies that you claim for your own that you can't even show why they make sense in your worldview. I mean, I would like to ask questions like, why does logic how can you defend universal logic in your worldview? And I don't think you can. Like things like that.
You point back to a book that doesn't align with modern understanding, and
in what way?
I'm supposed to expect that we're just way wrong. We've gone over this. We've beaten that topic over the head.
Well, we have. I don't think what I think we've done is we've cursorily covered a lot of ideas, and we need to pick one if we want to debate more closely, so we can get into the details. Right. And unfortunately,
Neither one of us are historians or scientists, so let's stay in the laws of logic for now.
Okay. Well, I would I would love to get into those other topics, but I just do want to point out, at least for the audience that's listening, okay, what Alphanetic just said before demonstrates to me that he has no meaningful understanding of the differences between the case regarding Joseph Smith and his reliability and his trustworthiness, and the case regarding the Bible and its reliability and its trustworthiness. They're vastly different when you actually study those carefully and consider the details. There are millions of debates on both of those topics. There's millions of things written on all those topics. I would encourage anyone who even might consider the validity of what he just said after actually studying carefully all of those details. They just aren't similar. They're just not similar. Joseph Smith was shown to be a liar many times. He was shown to actually have inconsistencies in his own text, in his own Mormon text, which I'm sure Alphanetic has not read carefully many times. And then to take that and to somehow compare that to his hermeneutic for science, I do not know how we get there. I think that it just demonstrates he hasn't looked into those two topics enough to make that comparison.
Okay. So I really don't like that conclusion there. That's
well, then I wish you'd studied fairly those topics to be able to realize to not make that comparison. It's absurd.
So I think I can make the comparison, and
cool.
And it's actually pretty sound as to why. If you are making a claim that the evidence that we have for Jesus is enough, and then proceed to point to evidence, and then proceed to say, oh, this other evidence also just circumstantial evidence, just people's word, that's not okay, because he was a liar. My point is that the lying doesn't matter. Whether I completely agree. Joseph Smith did not raise himself from the dead. Completely agree with you right there. My point is just saying that people saying it is so is not enough evidence. That's my point. Even if people concede, because if it was,
but that's not the only evidence
that I'm using.
Sorry.
It pretty much is.
Okay,
it's
cool.
People's word in written text. That's what we have.
Okay, so I do think that
2,000 years old.
That lacks understanding of a few things. Some things that I think change when you look at the scriptural case, which I think I would encourage you to look at, is first of all, we can do prophecy sometime. I think the alignment with Old Testament prophecy is really important. I'm sure you think it's nonsense, but I think that the New Testament scripture follows after a series of Old Testament scripture that would have been very knowledgeable to the audience or the authors that have written the scripture in question. And then you have these circulating texts which quickly transmitted throughout the area that were saying this new thing about Christ. But instead of people immediately rejecting it because, wow, that's nonsense, those 4 people claim crazy things, there were many people believing it unto death. And this movement grew instead of didn't grow. And so you don't just have 4 people making a claim and now we waited 2,000 years and now we evaluate it now. You have an entire movement that built. In fact, you have as far as original manuscripts go, you have over 5,000 original manuscripts that we have today that show from all different locations that show the quick, rapid succession of the transmission of this text around the area. And you think all the people there who were seeing this obviously false account were just standing there going, yeah, well, that's their thought. But and really, while those people who are claiming this thing are dying for it by the day, and that's the same as a few people saying, well, I saw Joseph Smith rise from the dead when we've seen that he's been non-trustworthy. These are very different cases. You're not considering all the details surrounding that. Not only that, the internal consistency of the New Testament itself, which is not in the Mormon texts. So, I mean, I don't think that I'm saying, I do not think you've studied these areas enough to consider those details. I think you have a cursory atheistic understanding of these two topics, and so you can make a comparison.
I think you have a very one-dimensional conception of why somebody is going to come to a conclusion, and I really can't stress this enough. Just because somebody has formed a different conclusion than you does not mean they have not looked into it. Does not mean that they have not.
I'm saying
that is very important.
I'm saying I don't feel like you've looked into it because you're comparing Joseph Smith and his reliability to the Gospels and their reliability.
So it is a philosophical argument that I've made. And I'm simply saying that when we are comparing two types of evidence, well, it's the same kind of evidence. Perhaps you're right in the sense. I'm not sure. I don't even know what you're referring to specifically with Josephus. I would be surprised if that was enough to sway me, because
I don't think so.
It pretty much falls into the same category as Mark and John and Luke. It's just somebody saying that they saw something, and that's what is going on with Joseph Smith. My only point that I'm saying is, if it's good evidence for Jesus, why is it not good evidence for Joseph Smith? Regardless of if we have him being a liar as something that's pretty evident, regardless of if we know for a fact that he didn't do that, that's my exact point. I'm just saying that witness testimony is not enough.
Well, I agree,
all I'm saying.
But I've agreed with that. I'm saying the reason I believe Christ's resurrection is because of all the details that I just rattled through that come together to bolster this case. The reason Joseph Smith is not the same is because, okay, you have claims of an event happening. Well, what you don't have on the Joseph Smith side is those other things, the internal consistencies, the other trustworthiness that you can point to through other people, the accounts from both people who are invested in the cause and not, like with Josephus would be not, Tacitus would be not, and some of these other things, and the transmission of the text through all this time, and the fact that in that text there's no meaningful variance to change the meaning, which I hope that we can talk about sometime too. I mean, all these other things that show that this claim that 4 people made, as you say, actually then substantiated through history for a generous period of time up until now, by the way, and just continued to grow with people continuing to put their lives at stake for that fact. All those details surrounding how that gets there are a lot more convincing than just claims. I'm not saying that if Matthew wrote something, I believe it. I'm saying that I'm taking the entire case in stride when it comes to the resurrection and the reliability of the Gospels. I mean, so altogether, I see a very convincing case. I would be the first one to say you cannot base your belief on a singular point of evidence, right? Just like you couldn't base it on, what is the other big points of evidence for me? Okay, the transmission of the text, like I said, we have so many early dated and proliferous amounts of manuscripts that show that we have the and we can go through this process, but the definite translation of the original text, that is a great piece of evidence for the reliability of the New Testament, that it's saying really what it means to say, but that's not good enough on its own. I'm saying that all the details together create that case, not to mention the applicability of Jesus's words regarding morality and all these other things that I believe that no other worldview has a correct substantiation for, and we have to come to a conclusion on that because we exist in this world, right? And so the case for me builds with all the points of evidence instead of just, and that's why I don't make this comparison between Joseph Smith making and claims about him. I mean, I could say that about anyone, right? Oh, people claim things about Jesus. Well, people also claim things about Muhammad, and people also claim things about Mary, right? There's, the visions of Mary and all that nonsense. And so what, right? But I'm not basing it off of that. Also, a meaningful reading of the, I think, of the New Testament text and the way that those things were written, and just some of the ways that words were written and their difference from some of, say, I think another point of evidence would be if you look at all the later, what are they called? Not apocryphal texts, the Gnostic texts and all these other texts, and the differences between the way these historical accounts in the Gospels were written and those Gnostic texts, which clearly you can see their fakery, not just because they don't agree with the Gospels, because they so try to embellish these stories. They try to write them as a human would if they're trying to make a big deal out of something. And even that point of evidence is an additional point. And so I'm taking the case as a whole. And I think that's meaningful. And I think it means that unless you've seen all those details, and I would encourage you to, that it's hard to say. I think if you at least looked at all those details, even if you didn't believe, you wouldn't be able to say, oh, well, Joseph Smith is similar. That's why I was a little upset at that.
So you're saying that you're not just taking the narrative of Jesus resurrecting. You're taking the whole Bible and you're putting it, you're saying, okay, this is a part of it, right? It is consistent with the whole scripture.
No, I'm saying that all the different types of evidence, I'm saying all the different types of evidence that would point I kind of started in one circle and then I went to a bigger circle in my talking, so my mistake. At least in the one circle, all the different points of evidence that point to Jesus' resurrection / the reliability of the text that accounts it, that is a bubble that has a lot of different details in it that all line up. And therefore I can say, okay, I think this is true. And then if you go to the wider bubble, I first of all think that if you can substantiate that Jesus is rose from the dead, then the jump is easy that you should believe the rest of the Bible. But even if you didn't, there's many other things regarding the existence of God and philosophy, and there's other evidences in the rest of the Bible that I think, again, together make the case for it. So at the very least, I would ask you to be reasonable, and you could even reject the Bible fully, but do not compare it to Joseph Smith. Please don't do that. I think that's unreasonable.
So I cannot speak on, for like the third time, I cannot speak on Josephus. If I am taking what I know, maybe you do know more than me in that. But from the gospel narrative, maybe also through saying, yeah, they were willing to give their lives for it. They were they all believed wholeheartedly that. So much so that Jesus resurrected and they watched him, that they were able to die for it, right? And that is enough. That's enough to say, you know what? He probably did. If those men were doing that thousands of years ago, sure. It's not compelling enough for me personally to say, okay, yeah, no, this is convincing. And I don't know if the people who watched Joseph Smith would kill themselves for it. I don't know. Couldn't speak on it. But what I can say is that if we think about it, it's not completely unreasonable to say that they would still do it had they not killed themselves. Or sorry, had they not seen it. It's actually not completely unreasonable to say that. I mean, they're pretty much just saying, yeah, no, I still subscribe to God. I saw it, and then they got killed. So, I mean, you could sit here and say, hey, why would they do that? Well, I mean,
that doesn't really fit with the account of what the disciples did.
Okay, so so correct me then.
You look at, I mean, if we are considering the disciples as real people here, the disciples, when Jesus was about to go to the cross, which, by the way, they didn't understand, according to the Gospels, they didn't grasp the fact that he had to die up until he was going to the cross. They still didn't really get it because they would ask, he would say it a lot, and and Peter was like, I wouldn't let you go to the cross ever. And they continued to be confused about it. And then he goes to the cross, he's on his way to the cross, and the disciples run and hide in fear. Why do they do that? Because they're fearing. They're like, well, if they're killing our leader, what's going to happen to us? So that's why they went and hid. That's why Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So you have fearful disciples. Fearful disciples are then going to make up a story about Christ, which meaning in the case where they stole the body, make up a story and then die for that lie. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And because you can't just talk about the fact that they saw some sort of appearance of Christ. Again, it has to fit into all the details. You can't pick on one detail. So now all the details are his death. The tomb was empty somehow, and then we had the appearance, and then we had the conversion of these, like the switch up of these disciples, where now what was the story in Acts? They preached in the temple itself, the scariest place to preach, the most likely to be killed place. And then when they were brought in front of the priests, they said, well, you tell us who we should obey, God or man, and they walked out. Well, I mean, why are they preaching that gospel? Not because vague God told them to, but because Christ commanded them to do that. Why? Because they saw him. Okay, well, that also goes with the fact that the tomb was empty. And those are all details that are very important to consider. You can't just pick on one. To identify how did these disciples change their tune? Because before they were hiding in fear of their very lives. So clearly they cared about their lives. And in that particular moment, the existence of God and their belief in God in the Jewish sense had absolutely no bearing on their mission. So clearly there was something to do with Christ. There had to have been something. You could say it's a mass hallucination, which is a crazy argument people try to make. But something had to happen to shift their argument.
I'd be far more inclined to say that it was an error on the author's end than it's a mass hallucination. I would be far more inclined to say, remember, this information that we're pulling from to substantiate this and build this whole case is built off of a few people who wrote. Well, they could. I mean,
an accurate text transmitted
to each other.
better than any other antiquated text.
I'm not. No, I'm saying I'm not talking about the first one getting retranslated. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they could write whatever they wanted. Like, why am I? Remember, the whole point in this is to drive. Well, the whole point of this is to drive. Okay, is this text authentic? Should I believe what it says? Right. So I'm not going to look at the text and say, oh, it makes this really good claim. It makes this extraordinary claim. And now I'm going to use that and then bolster it. Well, like, it's not really fair. If they can lie about Jesus resurrecting, they can lie about some other narrative in there. So as a skeptic, I don't really struggle with that.
I don't really understand the point you're trying to make to me, sir.
They can lie. They can say, they can put whatever they want in there. So you saying, or not you saying, but the scripture saying that they all killed themselves and that they all went into the temple. But this is what the text says. So if the text says that, and then we want to use that and say, oh, well, why would they do all these things? It has to be true. Well, who's to say they even did it? All we have is a few people that said that they did these things. If they can lie about the resurrection, they can lie about that. So if I have a problem with the resurrection,
well, that's why for the atheist you make the case using non-biblical sources, historical sources, and the one of the details that you can also make the case from non-biblical sources is that there were, I mean, of course, later down the line you have many Christians dying for this, but I mean, you have very early on, I think it was Josephus who reported it, like a group who had, first of all, he points out that they had at least claimed to have seen something, because Josephus also didn't believe this, but then also were worshiping this man who was crucified, and I believe he said willing to die for it, but at very least worshiping, which I think is enough anyway, to point out that this was something, or at least early adapted quickly. And so, like, it's not made up in the sense where they just made up the afterthoughts. I mean, I don't think that the Bible specifically talks about many of the disciples actually being killed. It's more various other types of history as well. I mentioned some of them being martyrs, but the point is that they were putting their lives on the line out there. I would also point out that, again, like these texts were written and circulated very quickly around the area. You think nobody's going to point out that this is nonsense? So if you want to take the route that, okay, maybe they just made up all this extra stuff afterwards anyway, this just doesn't make sense with the way the history went. I mean, like, no one points this out. Like,
No. What you just said was not true. You even concede that John was written like 60 plus years later.
96.
That's not written right then.
But right then, I mean, the people who would have been around during the Jesus drama would also been around during all those texts. John being the latest.
Yes, but let's think about how myths come into form. Let's think about how pretty much all stories go. It's whispered down the lane. Well, I mean, just because
but you're diminishing now the effect that Jesus had on the Jewish area at the time. This was a big problem not for Rome, right, to make distinctions. That's why Rome wasn't really concerned with this. That's why you don't have all these Roman historians writing about it. You have a couple, but it was a big problem for these Jewish people. This was a major deal because it was a false prophet giving a lot of in their viewpoint. Obviously, I believe Jesus is God, but from their perspective, this was some false guy gaining major traction and upsetting a lot of people in their community. This was not some just mythical nonsense a couple people were saying. Okay, remember, Jesus, if we allow the text to speak for itself, Jesus had thousands of people following all over. Maybe it was false, right? But he still had all that crowd build up, and so this was this was a major problem for them. This was not something to be like, well, we can ignore those writings. If this was false, there would have been a clear pushback on that. We don't see that anywhere.
And you're going to hate that I'm going to say this. You're going to hate it. But this is just simply not anything more, at least to me, than people that will just say that Joseph Smith came back. It's just not that much more. I'm sorry. Like, I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree here.
I just think you should look at the cases. I guess next week we'll do cases versus Joseph Smith versus Christianity, because it's wild.
It's just, I'm sorry, but there's just not much for Christianity here. And anything that we're saying, at least, sorry, not Christianity, for Jesus's resurrection, I have to disagree with you. It's just not convincing. And the notion
Sorry,
that
you're not convinced,
evidence or extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is a very important claim.
Undefined term. It means nothing, to be honest. What is extraordinary evidence? What you deem is convincing enough for you? No, it's not even worth that. You what you're basically saying is unless you have evidence that would convince you, you're just not open to even considering information. But someone comes up with a wild theory for a different way the flood could work. I mean, it's just craziness, dude. I mean,
that's how everything. That's how we always come with solutions. It's what seems most probable to you. It's you use your experiences and you use your current knowledge, and then you put the things together in your way, and you try and determine whether or not one thing is more convincing than another.
That might be how you do things.
That's how we do everything. That's how everybody comes. How do you do it? What do you do? What's better? That's how we do it.
I just don't understand, Van. Like, what is a more like? How are you coming to your answer on the accounts for Jesus's time is more probable then?
Okay, when I feel like we were beating this over the head. This is, I mean, I'm strictly going to just stay here and say what we have for what it is. I don't know what a convincing amount of evidence would be.
I know that.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to throw my hands in the air, right? But you couldn't answer that either, as to whether or not how much evidence is going to be enough for you to say, you know what, I don't believe it anymore. You don't know, and that's fair. That's how it always goes. There's nothing wrong with
actually,
that.
For me, I can't answer that. If you showed me one inaccuracy in the Word of God, that would be enough evidence. One actual, real contradiction that undermines the truth of the Bible. I think I'd have to give it up. I don't think it's there.
Who got to the tomb first?
Peter did. No, not Peter. John beat him. That's what it says.
What time?
I don't know. I don't know this detail. I'd have to look into this text.
So you're actually wrong. It was Mary.
But that was a different account of when Mary got there at a different time. Yes. Like exactly. The women got there first in essence, and then when the disciples came later, John was there first.
So why is it in two different books different?
Well, two different visits to the tomb are made.
No, they both say first person to get there. Who was the first person to get to the tomb?
I don't necessarily. You'd have to show me that in the text. One of the most common. Can you show me that in the text?
I can. I'm gonna have to. Hold on, I'm gonna turn off my face cam so I'm not like looking into it weird. But this is generally considered a unanimous contradiction.
Let's see what this is.
Man, my phone is acting super slow. All right. I've got them here. So we have Matthew 28, 1 through 6. If you want to skip over to that.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Yep.
Let's see. Okay, I'm there. Now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn, I'll just read it. Toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave, and behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord had descended from heaven, and it came and rolled away the stone that sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. The guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who has been crucified. He is not here, he has risen, just as he said. Come see the place where he was lying. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee, and you will see him. Behold, I have told you."
All right, we're way past what we need.
Okay.
So if you read the first part again, read the first verse.
And after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave.
All right, read John 20, 1 through 2.
All right, John 20, 1 through 2.
The first couple verses of John. So it says, so in Matthew it says, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn, the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. at dawn.
Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came in, it was still dark, and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. Yes.
So now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene, with no mention of the other Mary, went to the tomb while it was still dark, which is not dawn. Now,
well, it says okay. So the particular text says as it began to dawn, so that could be easily the same. So
now go to Luke 24, Luke 24, 1 through just the first one. It's actually 1 through 10.
Luke 24. Well, the first day of the week at early dawn. I'm not seeing a problem here.
Yes, and then but it's referring to the women. So if we keep reading a bit, it'll tell you who the women are, which the women are Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, and some others.
Yep.
And then now in Mark 16, 1 through 5, I'll just read it. Yep. When the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices, and very early on the first day of the week, they went to the tomb.
Yeah.
So
great.
We have in Matthew, the people that arrived was Mary Magdalene plus others at dawn.
Yep.
Then
as
Mark,
it began to dawn.
Mary Magdalene. It's a yes.
Why don't I just do it? Why don't I just do this for you? Okay. So it says in Matthew, it says as it began to dawn. That would indicate early on the first day of the week, as it begins to dawn. Mark says very early on the first day of the week. Well, that could include a lot of time, like as it began to dawn. Verse 24 of chapter 24, at early dawn. Well, that could be also as it began to dawn. Wow, two very vague statements can line up. Wow, that's great. And then if you go over here to the last one, I think it says. Let's see, I'm trying to get there. First day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark, which is also as it began to dawn would line up with that, and early dawn would line up with that, because of course dawn is when it goes from dark to light. So I honestly, I really don't understand the point you're making.
So in Matthew it says dawn.
Yep.
In Mark it says
no, it
sunrise.
doesn't. It says in Matthew. It does not. It's in Matthew. It says, as it began to dawn, which would indicate the point between when darkness would become light. That is a different wording. Very early on the first day of the week would indicate a vague time around the earliness of, and remember, the day started for Jews at 6 o'clock. So very early could include a dark period of time. Actually, for us, it starts at 12, so I guess it would be neither here nor there.
Well, John's okay. So well then dawn, which that's still, regardless of the wording, it's still sunrise. And then in Luke, it's early dawn. And then John, it's while it's still dark. And then Matthew, who arrived as Mary Magdalene, and then the other Mary. And then Mark, it was Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. Then in Luke, it's just a bunch of random women. And then in John, it's Mary Magdalene by herself. So the reason I'm even saying all of this is you said all you need is some form of indication that maybe there's.
It's not a contradiction,
maybe
sir.
A direct contradiction.
It's not. Because it's just not.
It's different everywhere.
If you read those four passages and you see that as a direct contradiction in writing, then I don't know how I'm going to talk to you about the scripture, man. I mean, if I'm talking to like three people who went on a trip in the morning,
they all say different people arrived. They all say it. That's a contradiction.
Are they obligated to mention all people arriving? All the again, you're lack of information. Okay.
The times are different.
They're not different.
Sunrise is different from dawn.
There's word sunrise is never used, sir.
They're all different.
It's never used.
No, but it's descriptions. They're all different. But it's not just that.
If I was talking to two people and went on an early morning hike, and one of them said to me, "Hey, dude, yeah, we arrived and it was still dark when we got there," and then someone else was like, "Yeah, we arrived and it was just beginning to dawn as we got there." Who's right? Are they lying? Are they contradicting each other? No, they're not. Of course they're not.
No, I'm saying that as a whole, it's saying it's still dark in this one, and it's just Mary. It's getting lighter here, and then it's a few other women, and then it's still kind of light here, and then it's some other.
Okay, so that's not what the text says.
They don't have it right. They're not consistent.
The text is actually more. Yeah, I just read the text, and I saw 4 different ways to indicate that early morning period that are purposely vague, that are not. Their sunrise was not used. That's not used. Don't put that in the text. Early in the day.
It's clearly sunrise.
It's clearly by what? Point to something in the text. Point to something in the text.
Now I need to pull it up again.
Sure.
Yeah, and very early on in the first day of the week, when the sun had arisen, they went to the tomb. It is the only gospel that explicitly says that the sun has already risen. It is the only one. They all say dawn, which does not mean that the sun has risen.
Which are you talking about?
The other one says dark.
Which gospel? I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the reference right now.
Mark specifically says that the sun has risen. Mark 16:2.
When very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And I'm trying to understand, again, how that text is particularly contradictory to the other ones.
Dawn, by definition, and the Greek words that they're using.
What Greek words?
Before the Greek word is, it means as it was beginning to dawn. I can't even begin to read it. And then the other one that they use is deep dawn, which is an equivalent, which means very early morning. But the idea here is that they are not consistent. One is saying that the sun has risen, and the other ones are saying it is either dark or it is before the sun has risen, which is what dawn is.
Okay, so the verse, so John 20 only says that Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb while it was still dark. The account in Mark 16 points out that all the women were there early on the first day of the week. They had come when the sun had risen. So that's not contradictory, because Mary Magdalene could have gotten there before the other woman. You cannot say that's an obvious contradiction. It's a timeline. It's a timeline of events. Yeah. So all John says in chapter 20 is, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark. So we know that she got there while it was still dark. And then all it says in the other chapter is Mary Magdalene, Mary, and the mother of James, and Salome, the names more people, bought spices so they might come and anoint him. Very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And you cannot say that's a contradiction, because if someone is recounting the actions of one person, and then someone is like recounting the actions of a group, and they give a broader time for when they arrive, like, oh, they arrived between 4 and 4:30, as opposed to, oh, I know this person arrived at 3:59, then that is totally reasonable. We would talk like that today. You can't read that contradiction back into this text.
Oh, so it is a contradiction.
No, you can't say that's a contradiction. I'm saying that wouldn't be a contradiction if people talk like that today. You couldn't say that in this text.
You can't prove whether or not you're right or wrong in that claim, and it's actually a whole group of people will say that.
I don't know what proof has to do with this. I'm reading the text. This has nothing to do. There's no contradictory information here. We would talk in a similar fashion, and we would not be like, "Oh, you just contradicted yourself." No way. We'd never say those two stories contradicted.
It's like, what's more realistic? Either they got it wrong, or it's like, oh, she just came at a different time.
I'm reading the text. I'm being reasonable. The one text tells me that one person came early when it was still dark, and the other text recounts the movement of a group of many people and uses a more vague timing. How is that unreasonable? Why would I not?
Will also say that there's another group of women. It's
using more vaguer timing words, because they're not throwing, like, if it had said in Mark 16 that Mary Magdalene, Mary the brother of James, and Salome and Blasphemy, and it says that they all specifically had come when it was like, if it said in the previous passage that if it outlined the specifics about her coming that could not work with this wording here, then that would be different. If they said they all specifically, individually came when it was light, instead of using a term to describe a group, I'd be like, fine, okay. Well, it said, like, if Mary Magdalene was specifically outlined as coming when the sun was risen, and then she was outlined as coming when it was dark, that would be different. But you can't read that into the wording here. That's just getting very, very intensely absurd on text. It's not communicating that. I just don't understand how we get there.
I don't think it's just getting into semantics. I think it is very important, because seemingly if they say they did get into a group, it's just very coincidental that they all managed to just talk about this story one time. It's just really coincidental that this one talked about her going by herself and didn't mention the group, and then the one that mentions the group it doesn't mention her going by herself, and then the one that mentions the next.
Why
one
are they all
sister,
obligated to mention it in the same way? In fact, a lot of people will point out
the same way.
That,
it's that they're nope.
Okay,
it's not about. It's that you're missing the point that I'm trying to illustrate.
You're not really making a point.
I believe that it is more probable that it is.
Okay, I believe that is more probable is not fun to hear. That's not. What does that mean?
You believe that it's more probable that Jesus rose from the dead. I mean,
I'm reading this text.
Here. I'm not going to make an assertion. I'm saying that here, when we're actually looking at it, it's just very strange that they all seem to be in at the same timeline. I mean, they get like the dawn and the sunrise. That seems to be contradictory, and it could be
I don't
different
agree.
groups. My whole notion, the whole idea that I'm trying to get across here is that wouldn't it be? It's just a little weird that they all will just ignore whatever the other one is, right? Maybe they don't have an obligation, but I think it's more probable that they were all recanting the same, or not recanting. That's not the right word. They're all talking about the same story. I think that's far more likely, and they just got some small things wrong. But here's the thing: it's getting into semantics. It doesn't even really matter. My whole idea is just that it's pretty clearly, and if we really dive into the text, it's very clear that it's just talking about the same story. The idea that it's not the same story, I think you need to read more into it. It is.
I believe it's talking about the same story. No, I believe that.
Think it matters.
No, hang on, Alphanetic. I believe I believe we're talking about the same story here. I'm identifying that I'm going to let the text speak for itself. When it gives me a particular detail about a particular person, I'm not going to then read that into all other details in an unreasonable way. Okay? I mean, this is simple language, right? This particular detail is given out a particular person in this group in John 20, and the focus of this text seemed to be John. Like, if you look at the actual text, let's talk about John 20. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark, and she saw the stone had already taken away from the tomb. Verse 2, so she ran and came to Simon Peter and the other disciple whom Jesus loved. Why is she the only one mentioned? Because the point of John 20 is to talk about what she did after she saw the tomb. If you look at Mark 16, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary and James, Mother James and Salome brought spices so that they might come and anoint him. Very early on the first day of the week, they had come to the tomb when the sun had risen. Now it's talking about a group and around the time in which they arrived. You cannot say, well, it has to say Mary came when it was dark and the other two came when it was light. That's unreasonable. No one would demand that anyone speaks like that in any other situation. You can't call that a contradiction. And the purpose of this passage is to point out what they were saying to each other and dealing with their experience at the tomb. So you have two different accounts that were written in clearly for two different purposes to focus on different details, and to say that they needed to collude in some way to also mention each other's details is ridiculous. These texts were written for their own purposes.
Well, it's not just two accounts. It's all four of them.
And then the other two accounts do not have any more difficult aspects to them. They mention different people for different reasons and describe the same time period in which they arrived in general and then went about their own particular purposes in the story. To pick on that as an actual, which it's not an actual contradiction. It's just details and storytelling that aren't false, aren't contradictory to each other. In fact, they show that the witnesses were four distinct witnesses recounting their story, like their details they knew about the story, and they're not disagreeing with each other. So that, to me, that's just more evidence that this scripture is more trustworthy. If they all just typed the same words, then that would be more called into question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, that's fair. That's actually a fair assumption. So if they're all saying the same thing, then that's like, wait a second, did you guys look conspire? Right.
If they were like verbatim, if they plagiarized each other, then it'd be like, okay, well now something's wrong. And that's like, yeah, that's understood heavily. Like general understanding of comparing witnesses' stories. Like this is true in court and stuff today. If two witnesses gave the exact same verbatim testimony, but when two witnesses give similar testimonies that I identify their events and the truth of them, and they coincide, but they have different details and emphases, that shows that they're actually both telling their true story, but two people are two different people and they have different perspectives. And so I'm just trying to point out that that's not a contradiction.
Yep. So here's what this is doing though. So this whole idea is just to say that each one of these authors seem to have a different idea of what happened first. And that I think you can even concede that regardless of if they had different
I didn't
ideas,
say that.
But Okay, so I would press you on that, because notice how each one of these is, say, like, well, I was going to say they're at the beginning of the chapter, but they didn't make the chapters. That was Council of Nicaea. But it's if you actually are like looking through, isn't that true?
That's church. Let's let church history be another conversation.
No, actually, now am I wrong about? I might be wrong on that. I mean, I just generally attribute like putting most of that together is Council of Nicaea. I might be wrong.
Yeah, no, okay, I'll check on that. I'll check. Maybe you're right about
I'm
that.
actually curious.
Maybe you're right about that. Maybe you're right about that. I'll check after. Let's engage on this.
Yeah, because I know the chapters, they didn't just spawn in there.
No,
right?
No, they were not.
This is verse 14. This is fire.
No, they were not. Verses weren't either. Those were all later. Those were just for ease of reading.
Right. Yeah, I believe it's Council of Nicaea, but I don't point a gun to my head about it. So no, I'm just saying that if it seems to be that chronologically speaking, once we get to this point of the story, they talk about women, right? It might be Mary it might be Magdalene, it might be who knows, right?
Yeah.
But it's not consistent, and maybe you're right. Maybe it is talking about different stories. It could be completely different events.
I mean, it's totally clearly possible to me this was going on,
but I don't think it's as clear as you're saying, because again, this is kind of just an appeal to ignorance in the same way. I just think it's kind of strange that once we get to this story, they all seem to illustrate through just storytelling, not by saying, hey, exactly this happened here and this happened then. It's just saying, okay, next in the story, these are the people who I first want to talk about got to the tomb, right? And when we're storytelling and we're writing nonfiction, we're going to do what we think. We're going to write things in chronological order. They seemed to just either not know or get it wrong, or it's a contradiction. I think it's more probable,
or they're recounting the details that they desire to recount for their telling of the story, and they can all be true equally. Just like when you look at when Jesus, I know this is a contradiction that people try to bring up, when Jesus came to where he cast out the two possessed men, and then one says like Gadarenes and one says I think a different G name, and then people who studied carefully pointed out that like the area discussed where Jesus meant the two demon-possessed men, one of them was a larger area and one of them was a town itself, and it was simply just the two people writing just thought about it in a different way. They weren't contradicting each other because they didn't say two things that couldn't exist together. They were simply telling the story from their perspective, but it was still true. And when I look at, say, 16 in Mark and I look at John 20, I'm reading two things that 100% can equally happen together, and they do not contradict each other in the sense where you can't say that if this happened, this couldn't. When they're just highlighting different things. Mark clearly wants to talk about what the women were doing at the tomb and what the group of women experienced, and mention specific ones for his specific reason. While John clearly, based on verse 2, wanted to talk about specifically Mary Magdalene and her specific actions and what she did on seeing the tomb. Okay? I mean, and it still coincides. Mary Magdalene, all it says about her in Mark 16 is that so that they might come and anoint him. Yeah, she probably did go there for that reason. And then when she saw the tomb, John tells us what she did, and that does not make any contradiction with the events in Mark 16. And so I'm saying, like, for something to be a contradiction that makes me go, well, the Bible has an inaccuracy, I have to see two things that cannot happen together. They have to literally contradict. Yes. That's the word says. And I'm not seeing that here. I'm seeing two eyewitness testimonies that are recounting different details.
If you do say, like, okay, because you can actually make that claim, and technically you're right. By definition, it wouldn't be a contradiction because it sounds like they can be true at the same time. However, what it does is it says it just is strange. And again, this is very consistent through the Bible. I think there are just things that are strange that I can't falsify. And that's why it's really important for me to point to those things that I can falsify and say that's weird, because we have a lot of these instances where it's, why on earth do they all seem to say, maybe without literally saying this is the first person that got there, they all have a different notion as to what happened when the first people got to the tomb. Like, maybe they could all be, maybe they just all were recounting different segments.
They're all saying factual things that can
technically maybe
coincide with each other.
It's just weird. It's just really strange.
Is it?
But technically, if you mush it together in a weird way, possibly. But I would be very skeptical.
Listen, I don't make my decisions on what's true and not based on, wow, that seems strange. That's not applying logic to this scenario. I'm welcome to accept the contradiction where there's two events that cannot be together. There's a couple I'm surprised you haven't brought these up, but you will at some point. There's a couple in the Bible where, given the English text, it really seems like that. And then that's where you have to do deeper study and you have to actually go look at the original languages and stuff like that. I think there's a couple things in Chronicles like that that I had to do some deeper study on. And listen, when they're presented to me, I take them seriously. I'm saying that I haven't found one where, after studying and carefully reasoning through the text and considering the context and not just glossing over and saying, wow, that looks weird to me in English, I have two things that can't go together. And so I look at this contradiction. I just don't understand, man. I just don't. There's no logic. I can't logic only say this can't be.
Yeah, I mean, I see a group of women where I see each one saying, all right, this is the first group of people that got there. It's a different group of women every time, and it's a different time of day every single time. And while we may,
it's not a different time of day every single time.
It's not. Sunrise is different from dawn, and
okay.
Dark night is different from sunrise.
As it began to dawn and early in the day coincide with the wording in Matthew 16, which is very early when the sun had risen. Those are all equally qualifying statements, because the other two are very vague about the beginning of the day, and this one is a little bit more descriptive and also talking about the beginning of the day. The particular text in John 20 is particularly talking about Mary Magdalene and talking about when she arrived there, and specifically when she arrived there, which would be in the dark, and then what she particularly did at the sight of the empty tomb. There is no contradiction there, sir. There's just no things that can't appear together. And if you're going to say, well, the authors of the Bible did not mention all the same amount of women in each account when they were recounting the story for their writing purpose, and so I can't take the Bible seriously, I just think that's absurd, sir.
Again, you're doing that thing again. I'm not taking one piece of the puzzle and saying,
but this is not a piece. To say that this is even one piece you can put in would just be illogical.
So it's actually, it's not. But I think
I know you think it's not.
Beat this over the head a bit.
We'll let the audience hear what they want to hear.
I think we should. I think what would be much more interesting and different now would be more get into the philosophy of it. I
wouldn't mind, but fair? We've been doing this for 2.5 hours, and I have to get up at 6 tomorrow. So do you really want to jump into an hour more philosophy, or do you want to do this next week? And I guess this will be a series for a while.
Well, we can do it next week, but I know the Bible study is important.
No, it's okay. Yeah, this is edifying for this particular group, and I think. And so listen, you know, a lot of these. Sorry, Alphanetic. A lot of these people in this call know you and know me, and have known you or me for a while, and respect us to some degree. And I don't know. This has been, in my opinion, overall, when I step out of my opinions and your opinions, I think it's been a good conversation. I've enjoyed this back and forth.
Yeah. Well, let's. How about this? How about we do like a little do like a summary of your ideas, and I'll do like a summary of mine, and just see.
Listen, as soon as we talk about, I'm telling you now, because it's true. If I even mention an idea on philosophy and the Bible, then we can just add 2 hours, because it's what's going to be, and I have to actually make sure I get to bed. So if I don't get to bed,
that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just saying, like summarize, like literally, conclusion, like in modern day debate, for instance, right? Just go on for a minute. Say what everything that we've talked about. Just condense.
Oh, summary of what we've already talked about. Yeah. Okay. Well, you go first, so I can think on what I want to say, and then we'll talk about what we might do next week, and then I'll wrap up.
Sure. Yeah. So in summary, this is a good talk. I do not know everything about the resurrection of Jesus. In all honesty, at least within my field of study, I study specifically philosophy. Right. It doesn't matter too much. I mean, it does matter, as if he resurrected, that's a big deal. However, I think that there's a lot of other places to point, and specifically that one has not piqued my interest. I wish we had a bit more time to go into the philosophy of it, because I think that's a lot more applicable to what I know and what I've researched. But I will say, the reason, and I want to emphasize this, the reason that I do not subscribe to this The reason that it is that I am firmly against the Bible specifically, not even the notion of a God necessarily, but the Bible, is because we have many texts within the scripture that seem to go against unanimous consensus within a particular field of study. Again, we have Noah's flood, which almost certainly could not have happened within our understanding of geology, anthropology, and even mythology, because we have other flood narratives that seem to have originated before that. It's not just that, but also the origin story, the creation story doesn't align at all. It just seems to me that there's too many of these falsifiable stories in the Bible that we can point to and say, that's not quite right. Yet we have some mediocre evidence, quote unquote, for the resurrection, and that seemingly is enough. I have to say I disagree with that. I disagree with that. And I think that the pill of naturalism still goes down smoother.
Okay, I guess my closing statement. Again, also have enjoyed this conversation. I would say, at least in my life so far, and I went to Northeastern, this is Alphanetic's probably the most knowledgeable that I come across. I've talked to a lot of other people who have a lot to say, but are a lot less knowledgeable. So at least the most knowledgeable sounding. So I really appreciate Alphanetic, and this is going to be a lot of fun. And I can't wait to present this stuff to you guys over however long me and Alphanetic can bear chatting with each other. But I'm going to point out a couple of things. The basic premise that I'm hearing from Alphanetic is that when he takes his scientific worldview, and then he takes some things in the Bible that, remember, that's how he understands them to mean. We didn't have time to get into, okay, do those verses regarding certain events actually say those words that he says? But those are very specific. But as he understands the Bible and the scientific worldview that he has, when he puts those two things together, he finds a scientific worldview of this world in this current timeline not to agree at all with some of the ideas in the Bible, and therefore he doesn't find the Bible very reliable, because he thinks that the scientific worldview that we present today has presented the most likely possibilities for the universe. Now, I'm going to say this. He said that this worldview, this scientific process that he presents, can at best make assumptions and predict things about times other than the time we're currently in. But then he uses this as a standard to apply it to the Word of God to say what is and what cannot be given the text. I would say that's a double standard, because you're using something that cannot be said, called a measure and a ruler of truth, to find a measure of a ruler or of truth or not truth in the text of the Bible. I think that is really important to consider. I will also point out that as much as Alphanetic might disagree with me on this, science and history and other areas of study, they do not start at logic and evidence. They start at worldview and belief. And I'm telling you now, the world system we have is a naturalistic system. And so they are going into their study not believing a God already. If you don't believe a God, then when you study science and have to take data and come to a conclusion, then you will come to a conclusion that is logically consistent with a worldview that already says there cannot be a God. And so that's why we have, I don't want to say a super solid and consistent, but at least a system with some reasonable logic that completely doesn't allow for the Bible, because they had to come to that logically with already saying that there is no God. Because remember, the way they come to their answers is they say, well, the only way that we can discover and ideate about things is by what we can see. That's called materialism. Only the things in front of us, only the things we see and can touch and can observe is how we can come to conclusions. When you think like that, you will never see God. So think about that, guys. But this has been fun. Alphanetic, I want you to next just talk about philosophically what maybe a couple of topics you might want to address next time, so that we can both prepare our hearts and minds for that.
All right. I think morality would be the one.
Great.
I think that is.
I think
that would be the most.
I am very excited, sir.
That's my field of study right there.
All right.
That's my field of study.
Dude, let's actually do Let me think, because I'm also considering my schedule for the next few weeks. Because do you want to do? I'm saying either 2 weeks from today or 3 weeks from today. We come and do. I think honestly, I think this went really well. So let's just keep it an informal discussion.
Okay.
You down?
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
Listen,
right.
I enjoyed this, man. So I don't know. I thought it was cool. So hopefully you enjoyed it as well, and we're not too turned off to each other.
Thanks for doing it. I think it's fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, guys. I didn't know there was gonna. How many people are in here?
Yeah, a bunch, man. Yeah, dude. It's Alphanetic.
Right. What's up, guys?
Yeah, I hope this was edifying, dude. I don't know. Every time we talk, you mean more to me. You becoming a good friend. So, I'm glad we stayed in each other's lives, sir.
Well, next time you get in Pennsylvania, I'll give you a big hug and a kiss.
Yeah.
You know it.
Next time I have some money, I will. Or maybe I'll get you down here to Florida one day.
Dude, if you paid for my ticket, I would do it.
Hey, we might get there.
Or maybe we'll split it.
We'll get a job.
We'll do this in person.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm actually excited to see you again when I do. So, stay safe, dude. I'm gonna end the stream. That was fun, guys. Alphanetic, love you too.
See you guys.
See you. You guys can stay around if you guys ever have anything you want to say or ask me about or clarify, because we were moving really fast. If there was anything he said that was overly